Hello and welcome to All Stats Aren't We, a podcast in which Leeds fans cast their combined eye over goings on at Ellen Road, giving scrutiny to the underlying statistics and tactical footings at work at Leeds United. I'm Adam Elliott and I'm joined today by Martin Riley. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm not doing too badly, thank you. I've had a chill day today, day off work, so I've spent most of the day playing Borderlands 4 and a little bit of Football Manager, a little bit of housework, and cooked some tea. So yeah, it's been a pretty chill day for me. I made a shepherd's pie, but I put some Swede and carrot mash in with the mash on it. So just trying to get some veg in my kids because they like hostie when it comes to veg. So so yeah, I enjoyed it. They didn't. The youngest one is still currently picking at it. She's been at it for about half an hour, but we've told her that she can't have a pudding until she's at least eaten half of the shepherd's pie, and so she's still picking at it. It's probably clap cold by now, but yeah. How are you?
That's what trained me when I was a kid as well. Now I absolutely love my greens. I'm well. I had a boring dish tonight. Last night I was meant to be on this podcast, but one thing turned to another and a lot of things were going on, so I didn't. And that was a lasagna night, so I'm annoyed that I didn't get to say that I made a really nice lasagna. Instead, tonight I've had pasta again, but it's just been the most boring tortellini that you've ever seen in your life, so it's not even worth the discussion. Yeah, so we'll leave it there. Otherwise, I'm doing well. Thank you very much for asking, my friend. Just a reminder for everyone listening to leave us a review if you are, and also go onto our YouTube, subscribe, like. We are on there now. I'm not going to keep reminding you all. Video content is a thing this season, and we're very much enjoying it, and it's here to stay. And for our video listeners and watchers, they might notice, people also listening might have seen from the title that we have a special guest on with us today to discuss Bournemouth. I wouldn't necessarily call him a Bournemouth fan, but he's going to help us with the Bournemouth section because he's very much an Iraola fan. And that's a certain Mr. Jon Mackenzie. Welcome back, John. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you. What have you had for tea and how are you doing?
Haven't had any dinner yet, I'm afraid. And I live down south now, so I call it dinner because otherwise people get completely mind blown. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I hope you have something nice after this. It is already quite late, so I hope that you've got some energy in you for this. But yeah, it's good to have you back. It feels like old times. And we're going to just talk about, lots of out possession structures and all the fun stuff that we love about Andoni Iraola today. I wanted to just bring up this tweet from people who might be a bit confused as to why we picked you, which is that you said back on the 30th of August, it always brings me joy when other people feel the joy that Andoni Iraola brings. I have to say, I hope that we're not feeling joy on Saturday from Iraola. I hope it's Leeds causing him some considerable pain. But let's talk about Bournemouth then, shall we? Let's get straight into it. You are our guest for this today. So how do you think that Bournemouth fans feel at the moment about where the club's at, and how do you think they feel about Iraola as well? I guess they're probably quite happy that he ended up staying, given some of the manager merry-go-round that went on this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not a representative of the Bournemouth fan base. I'd like to point that out before I start. But I from what I see on the internet, they're pretty happy. Certainly when I watch the games, I hear the fans singing his song quite a lot. And yeah, I think this season is another example of what kind of upside a coach like Iraola brings, because they've lost essentially a back line, or certainly gained a back line now that they brought in Alex Jimenez as a right back. And yeah, they sort of go from strength to strength, despite the fact that they sold, approaching £200 million worth of players during the window. So, a coach with a solid plan, and a plan which is working out well. I noticed that I think Understat have Bournemouth top of their table at the expected points. Opta analysts have them about third. So they are performing well, and they are well worth their performances according to the underlying numbers. So I think it must be a pretty good time to be a Bournemouth fan, I should imagine.
Most definitely that. And you mentioned a bit about the squad there. What do you reckon their squad looks like in comparison to the rest of the league? And is there any business that they need to do in a window which you didn't think happened? Or
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think with Iraola, what you get, and we'll talk about this a lot, I think, in the show, but what you get is he's quite an outlier in terms of the football that he plays. And I think as a result of that, you can sometimes get it can be sometimes difficult to judge the level of the players who are playing for him. Um, I mean, for example, the two centre backs last season, Dean Howson and Ilya Zabani, have both moved on to Real Madrid and PSG respectively. And I think a lot of people will be quite surprised that Bournemouth centre backs are going to those two clubs. But I think there's something about the way that Bournemouth play, which is on the one hand like very different from what a lot of other teams are doing, but also potentially quite indicative of the way that modern football is going. And so I think as a result of that, you almost get the effect that the Bournemouth players look incredible within their system. I'm never entirely sure what they're going to look like outside of that system. So um, I suppose in answer to your question, the good side of that is that you can bring in replacement players who seem to fit in without any sort of drop off at all. So, for example, they brought in this kid from Red Star Belgrade. Yeah, that's right. Is that the right club he was at? I think it was. Called Vjelko Milosavljevic, and he just looked like he'd been playing at the level the whole time that he'd been there. Bafoda Diakite has been brought in from Lille as well, and he is another player who just has slotted in at centre back pretty much seamlessly too. So I think they've not only are they a team who have very good recruitment, but also they have a coach who can get the most out of the players. The players, once they understand the system, fit into it very well. And I think as a result of that, Bournemouth are able to have that high turnover of players without it really hurting them.
Sorry to jump back to the beginning of last season when Iraola first took charge here, John. But what did you put it down to in terms of their poor start to that season, in terms of at least in terms of points? Do you think it was because the kind of patterns of pressing structure took a bit of time to really get into the players? Do you think it was partly that? Do you think it was partly that they had, if you remember back in last season, they had a really tough start of games, it looked like on paper as well. But ever since then, they've obviously been, since about 10 games into last season, he's been one of the most impressive coaches in the Premier League in terms of how they've looked. So what do you actually put it down to in the end, that particular aspect?
I mean, it was a combination of different things. There was a few games where they dropped points late on and were a little bit unlucky for it, no doubt because the fatigue that was setting in from the pressing. The pressing itself, I think, is very instinctive. So I think you have to have players in that system in certain positions who are able to read the press quite well. And if you get it wrong, it can go very, very badly wrong because you end up just leaving easy routes through your structure for opponents to exploit. So I think it was just a combination of those things, a little bit of unluck, and a sense that it just took the team a little bit of time to get going. I know there was some quotes at the time in the Times where Dominic Solanke was talking about how difficult they'd found sort of getting on board with the pressing at first. And I think, potentially like a bit of a banana skin had it not turned around, because I think the whole team has to have faith in the press for it to work in the first place. So fortunately they got through that rough period, and now they're in a situation where, obviously they're going from strength to strength. So it's been interesting to see it unfold, and it's been very interesting watching the games happen because I think there's been definite evolution from Bournemouth to the way they play in the last couple of seasons as well. So it's quite nice having the experience of following a team through a whole season to see what tweaks are made.
That's interesting stuff, is that? And a lot is spoken about Bournemouth, about the out possession side of things, and how I would assume that they get a lot from high turnovers and they're able to generate chances in that sort of way. Mm-hmm. But is there any other ways which they will look to create chances from more settled play? And is there any sort of routines that they go through, any automation, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would characterise Bournemouth's play both in and out of possession as just destabilising opponents. And I think Iraola's talked about this quite a lot, this idea. And I think, in the European game, particularly the elite level, the better teams tend to want to control games. And they do that by implementing structures, both in and out of possession, usually, which they coach the players in. And once the players, once they win possession of the ball or once they lose possession of the ball, they fall into these structures. And that's the base that they operate from. I think a big part of what Iraola is trying to do, both in and out of possession, is to prevent the opponents from being able to easily fall into the situations that they're well coached in. And as a result, he does that thing that Jurgen Klopp used to talk about with Borussia Dortmund, which is when they were playing against Bayern Munich, he would say, we pull them down to our level. We basically create chaotic conditions, and we're trained to operate in those chaotic conditions. And to the extent that now suddenly in a chaotic game, you would have them as being a little bit more favourable in terms of playing against Bayern Munich. And I think that's what Bournemouth are generally trying to do. So they do positional stuff when they have possession of the ball in certain games. Obviously, game state and opponent will dictate to a certain amount what they have to do. So, for example, at the weekend, Bournemouth played Newcastle. Newcastle played back five, sat deep, and they played low block and counter and forgot to do the countering part. And in those situations, obviously, Bournemouth can't just do their sort of crazy direct football, so they had to work the ball around a little bit. And they struggled a little bit because that's not the style of football that really suits them. But generally speaking, in build-up, I say build-up with scare quotes around it, a lot of the time they'll be very happy to go direct, even under very little pressure, in part because I think they know that if they create a basketball-type game, it's going to suit them much more than it will their opponents. There was a game last season against Chelsea, which I think it was the game at Stamford Bridge. I think I'm right in saying that. Ended up being maybe a 2-2 draw, or maybe a 1-1 draw. But in that game, in the first half, Chelsea basically gave them the ball and were like, fine, see what you can do with it. And they struggled a little bit. So in the second half, it was very clear that Iraola at half time was saying to them, just move the ball forward directly as quickly as possible. And what you'll do is you'll stop them from getting into their structures in and out of possession, and they'll fall apart, which is exactly what happened. And in the end, they had to rely on a late Reece James free kick to get the equaliser. So that's the sort of thing that you can expect from Bournemouth. They will build up in a structured way here and there, depending on how the game unfolds. But for the most part, what they're wanting to do is go direct and either have direct attacks immediately, or they'll win second balls and generate high regains and counter from there. But yeah, out of possession as well, same thing, right? They want to make these games as chaotic as possible so that teams can't arrive in their in possession structures, can't fall back into their out of possession structures, and as a result, space opens out, which they're really well coached at actually exploiting.
Yeah, so you've obviously been a big fan of Iraola for a while now, back to the Rayo Vallecano days. I just wanted to ask about this season specifically. Obviously, it's only 5 or 6 games in, but have you seen any differences or any evolution from Iraola from previous seasons so far? I'm sure you have watched most of their games, so you are quite well placed to answer this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, and the more I spend time analysing football, the more I accept that personnel impact your tactics, right? And anyone who's separating tactics from players is misunderstanding what football is all about and what tactics are all about as well. So I would say for the most part, the biggest changes have come in terms of personnel. Probably left back switch, so selling Milos Kerkez to Liverpool and bringing in Adrien Truffert has made them much more controlled in possession, I would say. And this had become a bit of a problem for them at times last season, where they would go ahead, but because they didn't have the ability to slow games down, they were sort of forced to keep playing in these chaotic game states. And obviously chaotic game states are great when you're losing or drawing in games, but when you're winning games, you actually want to reduce as much chaos as possible. And Bournemouth were struggling to do that. And now I think now with Adrien Truffert, he's just a much more well-rounded player. He has the ability to, he can hold on to the ball. He can go direct. He can do all of these different things. and has the ability to sort of slow the game down quite nicely. And I think that's definitely had an impact on them, both in terms of being able to slow the game down when they're in winning game states, but also I think not always go direct when there's better options, which I think they've done had as a tendency in the past. And I guess like in a more sort of cynical frame of mind, I would point out that last season Bournemouth struggled to hold on to winning game states, and this season Liverpool have struggled to hold on to winning game states. And there's a common denominator there, so I'll leave you with that. But yeah, again, I think that's the biggest challenge for Bournemouth, right? It's all well and good playing the style that they played last season as a team who, I mean, when Iraola arrived, they just survived relegation. Now they're, you would consider them to be a much more solid mid-table side. And so the question is like, how do you take that next step up? How do you move from the tactical approach to something that maybe is a little bit more sustainable further up the table? And that's a difficult thing to do. There's not many coaches who make those kind of steps up. And yeah, I think these are the sorts of questions that will be raised of Iraola when there are big clubs circling around looking for a manager. And it's become a little bit more in vogue recently to bring in mid-table managers at the clubs higher up the table. But the reason why it's difficult is precisely that, right? Is that your tactical approach is determined by the kind of team that you are, and where you are expected to be in the table, and the kind of games you're expected to engage in, the way that opponents are going to come out against you. So, for example, I think there's a lot of teams at the bottom of the table who most teams at the top of the table will say, well, we can play our game, and regardless of what the opponent does, we should be able to beat them, right? So those teams will leave themselves exposed to teams on the counter, for example, because they'll think that in general they'll be able to defend those situations. And Bournemouth definitely benefit from those sorts of opponents, right? If you look at the games that Bournemouth tend to win, it tends to be teams higher up the table, weirdly, than the teams at the bottom. When there's a couple of things there. One is that teams can just sit in and low block, and they're happy to do so. But also, Bournemouth try and generate chaotic game states, and teams that are lower in the league tend to be also set up to use chaotic game states to try and get an edge in games as well. So certainly Bournemouth lose their edge, I think, with teams further down the table, which I guess Leeds fans should be pretty confident about in terms of looking at this as a matchup. But I think that's the big question in this season is how much can Iraola sort of move beyond that and start implementing different tactical ideas, maybe more tactical diversity, so that they don't just have one way in which they're playing, and they have solutions for players for teams who are trying to low block or be chaotic against them.
Yeah, just one last thing on that last point there. You mentioned on a recent Tifo podcast that you weren't that surprised when Joe Devine asked you that he hasn't had a job at a higher level, a step up yet, Iraola. Respectfully to Bournemouth, if any fans are listening. Is that why? Is it because you don't think he's necessarily had he's not had the opportunity to do it yet, but has he not got the chops in your mind to make that step up to a more elite team and to be a more dominant team?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I guess my response to that would be that I think, one, it's very difficult for coaches to evolve and go from doing something very well. I guess I see it as, if a guy's really good at, I don't know, driving a car, you wouldn't necessarily say, well, this guy's really good at driving a car, so let's get him flying a plane. And that's sort of how I see it. The different levels of team that you're expected to coach. It's not like a sliding scale. It's not like if you're good in the lower levels, if you give someone a team higher up the league, they'll be a good coach of that team. And it goes both ways. You wouldn't take a guy who's good at flying a plane and necessarily say, well, let's stick him in an F1 car and he'll be good at that, right? So I think that the reality is that there's very few coaches who actually evolve across tactical systems in the way that you need, I think, a coach to do to be able to succeed at that kind of thing. In part, I don't know, maybe things are changing a little bit. I think we are entering an age where elite football is becoming, I don't know, we're maybe seeing the death of elite domination in the way that we were. Read that Pep Guardiola isn't going to dominate for the next 15 years like he has done. So maybe that changes things a little. And I think, with coaches like Thomas Frank going to Spurs, and you can watch Spurs and you can see very obvious tactical issues with the way that they play, but he has such good players available to him, and the game is becoming so much more tactically diverse that you can challenge in the league without having to get much more than 75-80 points, right? So I do think the tactical landscape is changing, so I would like to caveat with that. And I would say, like, how many coaches have actually gone from being lower table coaches to being very good? It's like Jurgen Klopp, and there's obviously a few other coaches out there. I don't have them all listed in my head, but like, I don't think people realize how rare it is for a coach to make that kind of jump up. So I would say that for one. But in terms of Iraola, what I would say is I think he's genuinely one of these managers who's doing something innovative. I think he's come up with an approach which, I guess people will argue he's a sort of protege of Marcelo Bielsa, but in terms of the approach that the two of them take, there's not a huge amount of, I would say, sort of structural, tactical ideas that are being mapped over. So it still feels quite different, and there's not many people who are doing the sorts of things that he's doing in the same consistent way. So I think he's genuinely quite innovative as a coach, and whether or not that makes him more likely to then be able to evolve, I don't know, but I think it counts for something. So, but yeah, I think what he probably needs is a stepping stone club, like a Spurs, or maybe a Dortmund as well. Teams where they're kind of willing to experiment a little bit, where you get the experience of working with better players, and then see what you can do from there. But the big difficulty, I think, is generally, as an elite team, you're expected to be less chaotic, right? Because you're expected to be winning more. So if your big upside is being able to generate these chaotic games and thrive in them, then really, what are you offering these elite teams, unless, I guess, the elite meta goes towards being more chaotic? But I just don't think that will ever be the case. It will always be as much control as possible, as much chaos as necessary, which I think is a slightly different way that Iraola thinks about football.
Yeah, that's one thing you mentioned now is about managerial changes, and that do you think that how well Thomas Frank does at Spurs could be a good indicator? I know Frank and Iraola play totally different styles of football at their respective clubs, but it's one mid-table side to a upper end Premier League side. So do you think that could be a good stepping stone kind of thing that you mean?
17th place team. Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
It's actually a step down, technically, right? Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's funny, right? Because I think so many of the narratives that are spun about coaches are based around just expectation rather than reality. And what I mean by that is that Thomas Frank going to Spurs has been sort of narrated as, well, here's a guy who's going to sort out their out of possession first, and then he'll sort of develop the in possession as he goes. And I think a lot of people will say, well, that's what he's done. They look much more solid out of possession than they did under Ange Postecoglou, which kind of ignores the fact that, out of possession under Ange Postecoglou was like borderline non-existent for a lot of his time in the Premier League. So there's an argument to be made that bringing in any coach would have improved the out of possession. And actually, like, watching the games, I was at the Villarreal game in midweek last week, and I was amazed at actually how poor their out of possession was in that game. And I say this because I think people get it into their heads that certain coaches are certain things, and then they read that into what happens. And so, Spurs have had, relatively speaking, like, okay results under Frank. And so, what they'll say is, well, he's sorted out the out of possession. All they need now is just a bit more, in possession upside. They need that at the moment. They're sort of relying on playing channel balls and moving the ball in the wide areas. If they can just add a little bit more central progression, a little bit more control, have midfielders who can actually pass to one another, and then everything will be sorted out. And I think, for me, what I've seen from Thomas Frank is basically what would happen if you took Brentford under Frank and gave them better players, and that shouldn't be too surprising, right? And it shouldn't be considered to be insulting, because as a football coach, what you're doing is you're trying to play the game, and you have a way of playing the game, and your job is to communicate to people how you think the game should be played. And I think having better players available to you often doesn't mean that you think the game is any different, right? It just means that you probably have a better chance of succeeding at what you do. And I think if you look at their recruitment, they've recruited a lot of players who are sort of the profiles he has at Brentford, but better. So, and I think that's why it's so difficult to make that step up. I think it's because, it's not that coaches, I don't know. I don't think that many coaches think, oh, I'm doing this approach because I don't have very good players, and therefore if I had better players I would do these other things. It's just that's the way that they view the game, and they make the players work in that way. And then when they have the better players, they're like, well, let's try and do that but better. I'm sure there are some coaches who do think about the game where they're like, oh, I'd love to have better players because I would do more progressive stuff in possession. But I think for a lot of them it's not simple as just. I think the ideas part of football is the easiest part. So the tactical ideas, it's just anyone can go through that and be like, this is if you want to have more, if you want to generate more chances, you can do this and that, and if you want to stop chances, then you can do this and that. I think the difficult part is communicating those ideas to the players and getting the players into a position where you're simultaneously helping them by giving them instructions, but also not cramping their style by giving them too much information. And so, yeah, I think most coaches just sort of fall into the habits that they have at other clubs, and they take a lot of the coaching staff with them, and they end up sort of coaching in much the same way that they would somewhere else. So I think that's why it's difficult, and I think that's why it's going to be interesting to see what Frank does, because I suspect he probably won't evolve in possession overnight. And he hasn't given any indication that he's going to do that, right? People say, oh, coaches will evolve, and you're like, okay, fine, that they will evolve, but you have to have some kind of indication they're trying to evolve if they're going to evolve. And at the moment, from what we're seeing from him, it's very much the case of, I'm just going to do what I know from my time at Brentford, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe they'll wait until next season before any of that happens. Maybe they'll wait until they've got a bit of a break in the schedule where they can do some of the coaching. But yeah, it's just a really tough world, coaching, and the staff don't have any time to work with the players really, because they're constantly playing all the time and doing recovery, and then having days off so that they don't burn out. So it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So yeah, the odds are stacked against you as a coach if you're moving from one place to another, because you just don't have a huge amount of time. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I think that in terms of Iraola going somewhere else, I think it would be interesting to see what he would do with better players. But with better players, usually what we mean by that is more technical players, and there's a sense in which Iraola's system is built for players who are willing to do lots of hard work, and as a result of the system are able to maybe become greater than the sum of the parts that they would be were it not for the system. Whereas the issue when you have better and better players is that the opposite thing happens, which is the players as a sum of their parts are actually quite good. This is the big Real Madrid thing. Real Madrid is made up of lots of very, very good parts, and you can have a really shonky tactical system and still perform very well, right? And the difficult thing is that if you try and impose too much of a system on these good players, then you start making them less than the sum of their parts, right? So you have to get that balance right. And so, yeah, I think it's a tricky one for Iraola, because I think if you give him quote unquote luxury players, they probably won't do the sorts of things that he actually wants his players to do as a baseline.
Yeah, I think you did answer my question. Thank you very much for.
Sorry, that was a walk around the houses a little bit.
No. It was very, very interesting to hear what you had to say on that one, and that I had my own ulterior motives. I don't think that Thomas Frank will work. It's mainly because I know there's lots of tacticals saying, well, he played amazing possession football in the Championship with them, and no.
Some of us actually watched it. Yeah.
He didn't do that at all. But anyway, let's get off this tangent and back onto Bournemouth. So we've covered the in possession stuff. And you mentioned bits about their out of possession. Do you think the similarities and what he took from Bielsa is in the out of possession side more than the in possession? I know it's a hybrid press approach that they go for, isn't it?
I'd say the opposite, to be honest. I'd say that there's probably more overlap with the in possession ideas than the out of possession ideas. I mean, obviously Bielsa went man to man, and as we know, he sort of did that pretty much, fully man to man across the pitch, but with a plus one, -1 front and back. And I think Bielsa did that mainly for ease, because I think it's if you approach the out of possession game in that way, at least from an intellectual point of view, it's pretty easy, right? It's kind of like this is your responsibility. And in certain situations there'll be a bit of flexibility, but most of the time you just have to make sure that you're within distance of your player, and you make sure that you're defending them in an adequate way, and you make sure you run a lot. And the striker has to sort of know how to play a player down in the press, and one of the centre backs is more zonal. But beyond that, I think it's and it doesn't really change much depending on the opponent, because you just end up matching whatever they're doing. So it certainly reduces the sort of the intellectual burden of the coaching process out of possession. Whereas I think the opposite is probably true of Iraola's. I think, as I said before, the Iraola approach requires quite a lot of interpretation from the players in it to judge when jumps have to be made. And that's why I call these hybrid presses, right? Because in a hybrid press, what you're trying to do is get the benefit of being in a zonal structure, but also able to jump into man-to-man phases as well. And being in a zonal structure gives you nice access to all of the players on the pitch. And then you can, in theory, you can jump at the right time and end up in this man-to-man structures. And so what that means is you end up with sort of chains of players who have 2 or 3 marking responsibilities, so that you can press on one side and then come back and press on the other side, depending on what's going on. And so you need to have players who are able to recognize when they need to go from one marking responsibility to another. They need to be able to read, I think, the way that opposition build-up works, so they can recognize what the sort of general probabilities are that the opposition are going to do certain things, and recognize where the danger is. And as a result of that, if you can do it really well, it's great, right? Because you're almost anticipating what the opponent are going to do, and you make it very hard for the opponent. But if you can't do that, and you arrive late in your jumps, what you're doing is just leaving free players all over the place, and a good team in possession will just pass through you like you're not there, mainly because you aren't there, which is the problem. And so, I think the out of possession thing is a little bit more complex than it is for Bielsa. Although Bielsa has changed a little bit at Uruguay from what I've seen, but that's another story for another podcast. But in the in possession stuff, I think lots of similarities. Making the games direct. Lots of build up in wide areas. So using double width, so your fullbacks and your wingers engaging quite a lot, trying to pull the edge of a block apart a little bit. An ability to know what to do in direct attacks, so that you're very efficient in those moments, which I think is something else that Bielsa is very good at, coaching players so that they become very efficient in those moments, because he covers all the possibilities and gives the players the set of rules to operate by. So I would say maybe, there's in possession a bit more like Bielsa, out of possession, I would say a little bit different.
That's really interesting, and because I would have pictured like one of the key attributes to a Iraola player to be physical attributes, stamina, able to go all day, and obviously that is the case. They do need that, but it's also seen that they need quite a high level of footballing intelligence as well to be able to understand how the game is unfolding. And do you think that? Do you think? I know you may not know this, but is there anything that you think that Iraola does differently in his training to try to help the players in doing that?
I think what tends to be the case is that certain players become very important for him. So, for example, maybe a nice example of this is the number 8. So, essentially, what you'll have is like a 6, an 8, and a 10 in his pressing approach, and the 8 has to do a lot of decision making, I think. So, often the 10 just kind of has a couple of responsibilities and will jump up onto one of the centre backs, and then the 8 has a degree of responsibility to decide what happens behind them. And so recently, at the beginning of the season, and during pre-season, actually, I was watching them in pre-season, and I thought the press is looking really not great at the moment. And I was a little bit nervous going into the season, thinking, okay, they've lost a few players. Does this mean that like they got away with it because they were relying on certain players? Ryan Christie, being injured at the end of last season, had an operation to sort that out. Lewis Cook got injured fairly early on this season as well. And they were playing Marcus Tavernier and Alex Scott as well. Tavernier as the 8 and Scott as the 10, which makes sense in that Alex Scott feels like a more creative player than Marcus Tavernier. And Tavernier is one of those players who will just run all day long and will never let up. And it just wasn't really working. And then in one game, he switched it around and put Scott deeper and Tavernier higher, and it just fit their skill set so much better, because with Tavernier you have like an ability to be sort of physically elite in the kind of way that you want from an Iraola player, but also has a decent shot on him, and I think has the ability to play the out of possession role from a physical point of view, and maybe doesn't have the ability to read the role that the 8 should be doing, whereas Alex Scott clearly like a very intelligent player, and I think once they made that switch, suddenly everything worked because they had the right combination of players in the two roles. There's something that happened last season as well, because they were playing Ryan Christie further forward and then dropped him deeper, and played Kluivert ahead of him, and suddenly that sort of clicked as well. And I think Tavernier and Kluivert, for me, very similar types of players. Players who, as we've said, physically elite players, but you might Kluivert has had a disappointing career, and Tavernier is sort of just a sort of Bournemouth player for God knows how long. And they've really thrived in that 10 spot. So yeah, I think that's what determines the tactical approach is having the correct player in the correct position. And sometimes that might be having a smart player in a position who can read the position well, or it could be having a physical player in a position where having that level of intensity, ability to carry the ball at speed, etc., just raises the profile of things. And I guess, for Leeds fans, Tyler Adams is kind of an interesting one, because he plays in the deepest role this season so far, and there's things about him that I really don't like. And Leeds fans would probably not be surprised to hear that he's not the most technical player. What he is pretty good at is doing a job out of possession, getting around, covering a large space, winning the ball back and recycling. And there's been certain games where he's been really important because he's done that. So again, I think it all comes down to just having the correct player in the correct role to be able to play the role in a certain way. There are weaknesses about Tyler Adams in that deepest spot. And again, it comes from what I was talking about before. I don't think he's a particularly good reader of the press. I think he's quite conservative. So he's sometimes a little bit slow to jump up when the player ahead of him goes, and it can sometimes leave spaces that teams can exploit. But he's very, very good at covering the spaces, just running around covering the spaces and making sure that he's offering a bit more of a zonal option in the middle as well. So yeah, that's what it comes down to me for me. It's making sure you've got the right players in the right positions to be able to make the system work.
Okay, so talking more about Leeds and this game specifically, then I'm sure you watched the Newcastle game against Bournemouth at the weekend. What a load of fun that was. Are you expecting anything different from that game to this game against Leeds?
Yeah, my opinion of Leeds this season is that they're not really a low block side; they're more of a mid block side, and I suppose that then raises questions about what difference that makes to this game. Because with Newcastle, they were just sitting in a low block. They had 3 tall centre backs. They had Dan Burn, Sven Botman, and Malik Thiaw, and they I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning. I said this to you guys off air maybe, but they played low block and counter football and forgot to do the counter stuff. So it was very much kind of sitting deep, clogging it up. And then they'd obviously had a midweek game in the Champions League. They brought on the better players around the 60-minute mark. I'm pretty sure they didn't have a shot from that point on. So maybe it was a couple of shots, but they really didn't get the benefit of that. And I mean, fair play to them. Like Bournemouth really struggled against it, despite having like a chunk of the possession of the ball. So the question, I suppose, is what you expect Farke to do in terms of the out of possession approach. But from what I've seen, it's generally just like mid block, quite aggressive mid block. So and quite an active mid block. So you're sort of ball oriented and jumping up into those moments with aggression. But I think that allowing space in behind and Bournemouth's tendency to play more direct could pull that structure apart, and it will be interesting to see what happens if that is the case.
Yeah, on what Farke is likely to do out of possession, he generally has been pretty stable in what he will look to do, and there have been some exceptions from his usual. Like in his first season, he changed things up against Leicester and tried more of a hybrid approach, and there was a lot of kind of man-marking moments in there as well, picking up the players who were dropping from the forward line a lot more than normal, and having players following, like Pascal Struijk following the striker all the way to the halfway line and beyond, that kind of thing. So he has made little changes like that, and I wonder if he could decide to do something different for this one. Because it's clear to identify that Iraola does things differently to a lot of coaches. So I'm interested if he does try to do something a bit different with his out of possession side of things. But I think in possession, I do think that he will still try to possess the ball, especially with being at Elland Road. I think that is what he will go with. So that could cause us problems, knowing how strong Bournemouth are when teams do look to possess the ball, when actually the better plan could be to go a bit longer, hit the ball up to Calvert-Lewin and try to build from there. But yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think for me the interesting thing is going to be how much he sort of leans into a mid block, because I think if he leaves space in behind, then Bournemouth will try and hit it. And then the question becomes, how well do they navigate? Because I think in that situation, you're in danger of your defensive structure being pulled apart. So how do you navigate that? Do you sink into a deeper block, or do you just allow the game to become more of a basketball game? Because I think that will definitely suit Bournemouth better than it will suit Leeds. Although I think Leeds do have the players to be able to benefit from that, maybe. But yeah, I'm interested to hear from you guys, because from what I've seen of Leeds this season, I've watched most of the games. A lot of it is just it's build up in wide areas, trying to get into, I would say, the half spaces in the box. So having players running into those half spaces, players like Jayden Bogle fullbacks doing a huge amount of the progressive work in general, right? Largely because the central midfielders are a little bit more out possession focused, maybe. Obviously, you get in possession upside from those players as well, but I think the idea is that they stay a little bit deeper. You push your fullbacks up. You drop Ampadu into the back line if you need to in build up. But then, the majority of it is trying to get wide progression. And if you can't get it into the box, then you've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin to try and hit from wide areas. So, I think that in terms of that approach, obviously there've been in possession questions about Leeds, whether or not they're going to generate enough in open play from that. And I think, from what I've seen, I actually think they're brilliant at generating chances from high regains. I wonder whether or not, making the game a little bit more chaotic would actually play into Leeds' hands a little bit as well. Maybe he would be happy just being like, okay, let's let this. I mean, I don't get the sense that Farke would think this way, but I also get the impression that actually, if the game did sort of break down into a bit of a basketball game, that wouldn't be the worst thing for Leeds. But I guess the reason I bring this up is because I think that Farke's sense of it will be, if we're losing out of possession structure, let's just drop deeper and make sure that we're not allowing space in behind. In which case, it could just be a bit more cloggy. But I don't know how it's going to break down. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
No, I think it's probably what you said there. It's probably Farke would tweak it if it started becoming more of a basketball match. Like last season, we were pretty delighted when games became basketball-y, because we felt like we had the dominance, the superior players
Yeah,
to just basically make that count and to win the match. But here, I get what you mean, and we do have some players that are well suited to it. The fullbacks are key to it, but I still would worry against Bournemouth's attackers. I think we're going to come on to talk about players that might be important in this match. You know, someone like Semenyo and giving him space in transition is quite a scary prospect. You saw what he did at Anfield against Liverpool, for example. So him doing that against our backline is an even more terrifying thought.
I guess for me, it sort of breaks down as like, do you think that you would get more upside from actually making it easier for Leeds to generate open play? Because I think, the more space there is to attack, the more dangerous Leeds are going to look. And I guess the question then is, well, do you think that do we think that Leeds are going to be able to better defend Bournemouth in transition than Leeds are going to generate if they're given a bit more space to be transitional themselves?
I'm not sure. Maybe, but I'd worry. And like you say, I just think Farke would end up not liking it and maybe would pull the team back a bit, and then suddenly it becomes just stodgy, and it just becomes us kind of like a lot deeper, letting Bournemouth have spells of the ball, and because we know that they're going to struggle to do stuff with it. So I do think it's an interesting game from a tactical point of view in that sense. Martin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do actually think that a basketball game could probably favour us more than some of the games that we've had so far this season. We haven't faced too many opponents where the game has been like that. I mean, the opening game of the season was against Everton, and we know that isn't what David Moyes wants to happen, so that didn't happen. Then we had Arsenal, obviously they just rolled over us, so nothing to learn from that one other than Farke making some poor choices. And then the other games have also been pretty stodgy. So you had Newcastle, you had Fulham, and most recently we've had Wolves, which was probably the most basketball it has been, maybe at least in the first half. Second half, it was just us sitting in. But I do think that it could suit these players more, and I think players like Noah Okafor, I think he would be able to do a lot of damage in a game where it was a bit more open, where he's got space to run into, and depending on who the other side winger is, that it could all probably suit them as well. So yeah, I do think that it could work for us.
I think the other thing to say is probably like, obviously Bournemouth are going to be quite aggressive out of possession in the high press, and I think one of the things that Farke always tries to do is possess the ball. I've just been watching the Wolves game back, and even there, it just felt like a lot of sort of bounce passes off the midfielders back into the centre backs, and I wonder whether or not that could hurt Leeds if they're going to try and possess the ball deep, and they are taking a bit of high press damage. I don't know whether or not you think that. I don't know what Farke really does in those situations where he is high pressed. I don't know how much it happened last season, but what's your sense of it? That if Bournemouth are pressing them really aggressively and quite well, what do you think that his solution to that would be?
I do think that he would probably still attempt to build up, but the players may just look to go along anyway, because we have those options now to get out of those situations. So we have players who we can hit DCL and hope to try to win the second balls from that battle. So I do think that Farke will probably still set up to want to possess the ball, won't say to the players just get rid of it as soon as they press you. He'll still want to do that, but I do think the players we've got in the back line are intelligent enough to know that they can go against that in little bits. So we'll see, but I'm hoping the players do, because that could be pretty disastrous for us if we were to try what we was doing against Arsenal, for example. And against Arsenal, we were trying to build up, and it didn't directly cause any goals, but it nearly did.
And then we obviously did start to go a bit longer, and it was Joe Piru trying to hold the ball up. So it just.
I was very impressed with Calvert-Lewin actually holding up against Wolves. Like that was notably good. So I'm sure there is that outlet there now.
Yeah, and the centre backs for Bournemouth, actually the whole team for Bournemouth, not the tallest as we were talking off air. So that's potentially something for Calvert-Lewin to dominate the game in that respect. And obviously we know that Longstaff and Stack are going to hoover up those second balls straight away. But yeah, I mean, you've already talked about the fact that Bournemouth are a team that are greater than the sum of their parts, and I completely agree with that. But we always ask on this section of the podcast who we actually think the key player or players, 2 or 3 maybe tops, for them are going to be in this match. And obviously team style and how the game's going to pan out is going to affect this. And what we were just saying about Farke and what he does might affect your answer here slightly as well. But who is your gut instinct? Who are the key players here for Bournemouth? I can't look past Semenyo if the game does become basketball, like, for example.
Yeah, and Semenyo is the difference maker on this team. Just a fantastic ball carrier, just an incredible physical specimen, really intelligent player as well, and also basically able to use both feet, and so ends up in these situations where he can go either way. If you get him carrying the ball at speed, running at a back line, incredibly hard to defend because he can go either way and get the shot off. So yeah, he's the one who I think is probably the one to keep quiet. That said, he sometimes drifts out of games, and I guess because opponents are sort of hyper aware of the fact that he is a key player, and so I suppose outside of that, from an attacking point of view, Evan Nielsen is just a fantastic player, super smart player. Has the aerial ability, not quite to the same level as Calvert-Lewin, but can sort of fashion chances out of nowhere from that. But he's also just a super smart player in terms of when he gets in and around the ball, he finds ways of generating space for himself and creating finishes, can finish in a number of different ways. And then weirdly, like maybe a shout out to someone like David Brooks, because he's been just a very sort of quite a nice complement to Semenyo on the other side. Just a bit more of a touchline winger guy, cross the ball into the box. So they've got a bit of everything. I think in their two wingers and the forward right now. But yeah, beyond that, the rest of the team, it just sort of feels like it fits into place. It's the team that it is, and you expect them to sort of perform as and when. But yeah, with those three, I think in the front, each one of them has the ability to change games and get goals, and that's the currency.
I think from the Bournemouth players I know, I've only watched the one game of Bournemouth so far this season, which was the opening game for them against Liverpool, which was extremely basketball-y moments in that game, and a lot of goals. I did pick up Trafford was one who caught my eye. Yeah. It seems to be a bit of an outlet and just does go quite high and quite quickly up to be an outlet when they've just sustained an attack. So that's one player who caught my eye, as well as obviously Semenyo. But yeah, I do see what you mean, that those are the main ones. Brooks as well. Definitely a different player to Semenyo on the other side, and put in a nice ball, I think, for one of Semenyo's goals. But yeah, who would you say will be the players who will be starting this game for Bournemouth, if you can make a guess?
Yeah, so it'll be Petrovic in goal. I suspect they'll go Trafford, Senesi, Diakite, and Jimenez probably. I don't know what the deal is with Adam Smith, but he's been injured. Lewis Cook has been back on the pitch since his injury, so he is there and thereabouts. I suspect he might be brought on this game game as well, but it'll be Adams, I think, and then Alex Scott as the 8. 10's a tricky one because it's Tavernier or Cliver usually, and I don't know, Tavernier for most of last season is just playing as a wide player, and has sort of been replaced by David Brooks as we talked about there. Clivert is coming back from injury, but Clivert has not started a game this season, I don't think, and has been coming off the bench, and seemingly that's not just a recovery from injury decision. It's that. I understand why Iraola would like a player like Tavernier, because he just does everything, runs around and has incredible a physical stamina, as well as he's the sort of chaos merchant that fits well into that 10 slot. He's an incredibly frustrating player, right? He can do bad things as much as he can do good things. That's probably not even true. He probably does more bad things than good things, but he has the ability to be a game changer as well at times. As does Clivert, to be fair, but seemingly Iraola seems to be starting Tavernier over Clivert, so I expect it to be that. And then Semenyo, Brooks, Evan Nielsen. I can't really see it being anything other than that, and because they're just playing a game a week at the moment, they have the ability to just run out the same starting 11. Maybe we see Lewis Cook starting, but I would suspect he comes off the bench. Potentially Ryan Christie instead of Alex Scott, who's also coming back from injury. But I think they're being careful with him because he had surgery at the end of last season, so I think they're maybe running him up a little bit more gently. So yeah, I think that's probably what it will be. That's the only position where I think there's a good chance that Christie might start over Alex Scott. Beyond that, I think the way they've been starting most of the games this season.
Yeah, nice stuff. Don't think there's too much more to talk about when it comes to Bournemouth now, but a few stats that caught my eye. They've started the season really well. Obviously, they've been scoring and they've not been conceding many either. They've conceded the fewest in the league so far with Palace. And a number of clean sheets as well. So they've been a difficult team to break down other than that chaotic Liverpool game that happened. But yeah, just a few, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on these, like crosses per match. They're not high for this. Is this again a tactical thing? Are they a team that like to attack more centrally because they've only had 3.4 a game, despite having, which is one of the lowest in the league, despite having sort of mid-table level possession? Is that a tactical instruction? Is it because they just don't have a lot of height?
I think one of the benefits of playing quick as a team is that it's much easier to carry the ball through the centre. So, yeah, I think where they can, they want to try and work the ball into the box on the floor in through direct play. They do cross the ball in from wide areas. They will have bumped up their numbers against Newcastle because Newcastle were basically low blocking, so they were swinging a lot of crosses in, and that wasn't a particularly great tactic for the reason that we've talked about before. They don't have a huge amount of tall players, and Newcastle have incredibly tall players. So, I would say that their crossing isn't something that you'll see a lot of. But a lot of the time, when they are building up, they are trying to inject tempo, pace into the game, and I think as a result of that, you do afford yourself the ability to actually generate quite nice chances through central spaces rather than coming up against blocks a lot of the time. So yeah, that would be what would explain that for me.
Yeah, and they've obviously, this is another one from me, they've won the third most corners in the league so far. I know it's only 5 games, but still. But they're third bottom for XG generated from set pieces as well. I don't know if you've picked up on this, but that seems quite wild. Is he just not that bothered about set pieces, Iraola?
Weirdly, they were very good from set pieces last season.
Okay.
They have a set piece coach called Sean Cooper, who's as far as I can tell, I mean, the coaching. This is actually a weird story, but like Iraola came over, and the only member of his coaching staff he could actually bring with him was the fitness coach. So the rest of the coaching staff that he works with are basically guys who were playing for Bournemouth in the 90s. So like Tommy Elphick and
Yes.
Sean Cooper and there's someone else as well, Simon Francis as well. So there's quite a few of those guys around. Sean Cooper is the guy who does the set pieces, and last season they were actually really creative from set pieces. This season they have been less so, and I'm not entirely sure why that would be the case. I think it's probably just small sample size, but yeah, they win a lot of corners because I think he's quite happy for them to take, because they're playing in chaotic game states, they take a lot of shots from distance, or shots where the defense are not set properly, so you end up, players jumping in and you get ricochets and balls bounce out, so they do end up with a lot of corners from that. And I think, I don't know why they've not been as good from set pieces so far this season, but that's definitely an area where they're very creative from them. So they will often do these like really complex routines because they're not tall, right? They don't have a huge amount of players who they can just target man in the box. And so what they end up doing is these really nice, they'll do like a short pass to one person who'll let it run through their feet, their legs. They'll go to someone at the on the corner of the box, and they'll just roll it across the penalty box line, and someone will smack it in from like the edge of the box. And they did that a few times last season. They haven't done it so much this season. I don't know whether or not that's because they're trying to maximize just going into the box. They've tended to just cross it into the box, and it's not gone very well. So I don't know why that would be the case. Maybe Sean Cooper isn't doing set pieces anymore. Maybe he's got different responsibility, and they're not focusing on it as much. But yeah, they were very good from the last season.
And just a few stats to reel off that really illustrate their intensity off the ball. Interceptions, they are third in the league. Clearances, they are second in the league. Tackles, they are seventh in the league. And then maybe the most interesting is possession won in the final third. They're top. And in terms of PPDA, they have the second lowest after Spurs. And in terms of pressing sequences, they're second after Newcastle with 61. So those are all really, really top numbers. And yeah, I guess it shows Iraola kind of down to a T in terms of what he's asking of the players. Martin, any closing thoughts for John on this section?
No, I think he's been very comprehensive in covering Bournemouth for us. So I want to thank him for coming on. Are you wanting to stay on for the Leeds part of the analysis, or are you wanting to head off?
I'll let you guys get on. I don't think I'm going to be as interesting on Leeds as you guys are.
No, perfect. Thank you very much, John. We are really glad that you came on, and we'll probably have you on for the next time we play Bournemouth, to be fair.
Yeah, good stuff. You happy for me to leave then? Do I just press leave?
Yeah. Just click the leave button.
Thanks, mate.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick one. If you're enjoying the video, be sure to like and subscribe to help us keep the content coming. And if you want even more, you can support us over on patreon.com/ASAW Patreon. You'll get bonus podcasts, exclusive articles, and access to our Discord community, all while helping us make more of the content you love. Thanks. Now let's get back to it.
Right. Now we're going to move on to the Leeds section of the analysis, which probably won't be that long because I've already done a little bit of that while we're talking to John. I really, Martin, feel bad for every single person that we have on for the rest of the season because we've had some good guests so far, but we just set the bar a little bit too high maybe there.
Whenever we have John on, it gives me imposter syndrome big time.
Yeah.
It's just how intelligent he is about the game. It's because of how much football he watches and has done for a long time. So, and whereas me in my free time, I play Borderlands, so I can see why but yeah, very, very, very good.
I watch, but I think I watch for different things to John, unless I'm told to for this podcast. I'm tending to focus more on players, and he tends to focus more on shape and tactic. Not that you don't do a bit of both. Of course you do a bit of both, but I'm more player focused, which is how, for example, I remember back in the old days, All Stats, aren't we? Hobbsy used to say he was more player orientated and John was more tactics orientated. I'm more Hobbsy in that sense. Anyway, but this probably won't actually be that long now because we did talk about some stuff before. But yeah, what are we expecting the Leeds lineup to look like on this one, Martin? How many changes are you expecting from Wolves, if any?
I think the only big change will be Jayden Bogle. Because
it looks like he'll be out. We haven't had the press conference, but it looks like he'll be out.
We haven't had the update yet, but I'm not expecting him to play in this game at least, no matter what. So I'm going to say he'll be out, and James Justin will be in,
full
and
debut.
then I think all the rest of the team will be exactly the same. I don't think there'll be any differences. I think Aronson will continue to start. I think he did quite well in the last game, I felt, against Wolves, so it was definitely his best appearance of the season so far. I'm not saying he was outstanding, but it was his best showing so far. And against Iraola, he will definitely want his best out of possession guys on there as well. So although I do really want to see Willy Gnonto in this one, I do think that it will be Brendan who will start this one. So yeah, unchanged lineup besides Bogle.
Yeah, I think I completely and utterly agree. It's a shame, with Tanaka, his injury is almost badly timed for him on a personal note. He's going to struggle to fight his way back in for a bit until maybe he comes off the bench in a game and does something pretty nice, or there's an injury or something like that. So I also feel bad for Jacobiel because Strauch and Rodin are just, you can't break up right now.
No, you
I'm
can't.
not actually, you and I last season actually were advocates for making changes, and at the start of the season, for making changes when you've won games. It's fine to do so, but it's really difficult when we're defending the way we are currently to break that up. I thought Strout was pretty immense against Wolves. He was genuinely brilliant. Rodon wasn't far behind, even with the mistake for their goal. So I'm not breaking that up. And then Perry's maybe, touch and go for this one. It might be the next one. I still think they'll stick with Darlow at least for this game and not rush him back. I think that gives you that luxury given on how he's played in the first two games that he's had to play so far this season. Midfield, no reason to change. Yeah, it's the Aronson thing that maybe I would change, but it wasn't a high bar at all. It was a very low bar, but he did have his best game for us so far this season. against Wolves. So he probably will just stick with that. It's just a shame because I would love a Nonso or even a Dan James if he's okay, but I don't think he will be to get a go here. But yeah, we'll probably find out more later in the week about everyone. I just think, yeah, Bogle, definitely, as you say, even if it's just his best case scenario and it's quite a big bruise or something, I'd probably just give it a week because that'll be sore. It might be worth just letting it go down a bit. And then after that, he can come back in. Or, worst case, he's done something quite serious, ligaments or ankle break or something along those lines. I hope not, but it's possible. We're recording on Tuesday, so we'll find out on Thursday if you listen to this. Which players are we expecting to cause Bournemouth the most problems then, based on what John was saying? If it becomes a basketball game, I assume you're going to say Okafor. If it's more of a settled game, I don't know who you're going to say. Maybe Calvert-Lewin.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Okafor or Calvert-Lewin. Probably either way, Calvert-Lewin is going to cause some problems because because he's got a lot of pace himself in transition.
Yeah.
He can definitely keep up with those fast attacks, and even though he's a big guy, people may not think that he's quick, but he was Everton's fastest player last season. There's an article which I put out in his scouting report, which we put together, so that he was the fastest player and also made the most runs per game as well. So him and Okafor are the two guys who I'd say would be the ones causing the most problems for Bournemouth. Who is going to struggle the most? This is one I'm not too sure on. It could just be as a collective, the back line, because of how good Bournemouth are at pressing. And if they don't make the right decision to go long sometimes to Calvert-Lewin, then that could make us turn over the ball and they could struggle in this one. They are probably the best out-of-possession side in the league. Maybe with the exception, maybe Arsenal, maybe the only one who's ahead of them. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be more of a systemic thing. I can't see any like individual matchups which are terrible for us. It's mainly Bournemouth's system which gets the most out of the players that they've got. So it's more going to be a systemic weakness. So maybe the one struggle will be Daniel Farke in this one, at least in terms of his tactics. But in terms of individuals, it'll more be, the problems will be caused by Bournemouth's approach rather than anything else.
Just a reminder to anyone listening that we dodged a bullet with Iraola. Like that was a fun time on Leeds for sure.
Great, yeah.
Some of the narratives that form on there are genuinely hilarious. He's brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit worried about our left side of our defence because Semenyo is it's not just quick. It's like John said, he can go either way on either foot. And he's also so powerful. He's like a pretty tall, pretty powerful, pretty quick player. It's just a bad combination. And it's going to mean that, like, you know, passing him on from Goodmanson to Strauch at times might be quite difficult to navigate if they do catch us in a transitional moment on the counter when it's more basketball-like, if it becomes that way. So he is worrying, and that side of the defence is more worrying. Whereas, like, Tavernier is a nice enough player and Brooks is a nice enough player. And like, I get why they're in the team, but they don't have as much pace and power. And so I'm not as terrified. They're intelligent players, but
I do think Strauch could struggle to handle Semenyo.
Yeah, if he catches him one-on-one.
Yeah, because you saw how much Strauch struggled in the Arsenal game when he was up against, who was it? Who was it? Gyökeres, who really did number on him. And I think Semenyo could do a similar thing. So I'd back Goodmanson a bit more because he does have more raw pace and he's quite strong as well. But even he will have his hands full with Semenyo because he does have everything that you want from a ball carrier to destabilise, as John said there. That's what he's great at. So, yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, because you can go either way. You can go on the outside and cross, or you can go on the inside and shoot, whatever. It's like just really difficult to defend against him. Although we're making him sound like Messi here, and he's not quite that. But he is a good player, and that's probably the area that I'm most worried in terms of an individual matchup. The rest, I actually think Calvert-Lewin will get some joy here. I've been really impressed with Diakité's start to live at Bournemouth. I've watched a couple of their games now since coming in from Lille, and he was quite high rated. He's only 24 as well, but Calvert-Lewin against both their centre-backs should have the beating of them. If we're firing balls up to his head or his chest, he should be able to make something of those. So, and he looks a little bit sharper every game now, Calvert-Lewin, I have to say. Every single appearance for Leeds, he's looked that little bit sharper. So hopefully he's on it for this one. He's probably going to be needed, because we probably will need to go direct at times, based on the fact that they're going to, I suspect they will continue to aggressively press us the way they have all season. Their numbers are outrageously good, as we mentioned before on the first section. Right, yes. So we have kind of touched on this, but are you actually expecting changes to our approach, Martin, from what we said with John? Like, do you think Farke's going to try to possess the ball at home? Because I do.
Yeah, I do, but also against Wolves, it would have been the ideal time for him to be super possession and wanting to play short all the time.
Yeah.
But I did notice that there was quite a lot of long balls going on against Wolves. We did look to hit Calvert-Lewin quite often, and we were being quite direct between the lines as well, not just long aerial balls, but also balls through the lines to try to split their lines apart. So I don't think it's going to be as possession, because I think we should be able to recognise that going longer will help us in this one. But there may even be some times where we go long from goal kicks. And I do think that could be the case, because there's no way that the analysts at the club won't have pointed out to Daniel Farke how good Bournemouth are at pressing. So I do think that there will be some differences in this one, and it's more because of the way Bournemouth look to do things than us. And then even when we do try to play out from the back, I think the players will be intelligent enough, like I said when John was on, to just hit Calvert-Lewin instead of trying to play the intricate stuff from the back.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, actually, that I wasn't on the Wolves review, but you make the good point there that last season in the Championship, the way we defended was ball retention, primarily. It was keep the ball off them and they can't score. We've not done that so far, and that Wolves game was certainly not that in the second half. It's very, very far removed from that, to be fair. It was much more, as you say, a little bit deeper and go a bit longer. And maybe it was just the game state that dictated that. And maybe that's what will happen here. Maybe it'll be the game state that dictates what Leeds are doing in possession and kind of how deep we are as well against them, because they do struggle. They are a bit like in the way we talked about Fulham with Marco Silva when we did the preview for that as well. Like, they struggle to break teams down, Fulham. Bournemouth are the same when teams are compact. They were rubbish. I watched the whole Newcastle game. It was a complete waste of nearly 2 hours of my life. I had probably more eyes on the Sunderland game, which was a little bit more exciting because it was on at the same time. But yeah, the Newcastle-Bournemouth game was horrible on the weekend. So it just shows what teams can do to Bournemouth when they go there. And Eddie Howe got it right, at least out of possession, even though they kind of forgot how to attack Newcastle. Anyway, I don't think there's too much else to say here, is there really? We're not expecting wholesale changes, but maybe a little bit more directness when we need to. But what are we actually watching this game of football? What do we expect it to look like, Martin? And where do you think it'll be won or lost? Because I think this is one of the most interesting ones we've had this season, because I think it's more of a guessing game than others. I think others, you could kind of see, we called Fulham spot on, for example. I don't know if this is easy to call.
No, it's not. I do think there's a high chance that it does end up looking very chaotic, especially if an early goal is scored. I think then it could really open up then. But if Daniel Farke decides to do what Newcastle did and really stodge things up and makes things difficult for Bournemouth, then that could make things a bit different. Hello, Kitty. So it will depend a lot on what Farke does with his out of possession shape. If he does go for the usual mid-block, maybe touching on a bit more aggressive than that at times, then Bournemouth will be able to get joy and we'll be able to get forward. And then if we are able to stop their attack, then we will get forward, and so on and so forth. So I do think it's probably more likely to be quite a chaotic game. And I think that's what it will look like for me. I think we will probably edge the possession stats, but I think it's more be because we'll be happy to let Bournemouth have the ball sometimes, because I don't think there's much point pressing them, because they won't engage with it and they will look to be more direct to go around that. So where will it be won or lost? I'm struggling with this one, but I will say whoever hits their transitions best will win this one. Whoever makes more advantage of the chaos will come out better off in this one.
I think if it becomes a basketball match, even though we do have some transitional threats, as we mentioned on the first half of the pod, and we could definitely be, a strong team from moments like that. I'm more worried about who they've got in transition and even their bench, like Cliver off the bench, for example, just another option that they have that they can do like that. So, if it becomes like that, I think they've got more threats to win the match. If we're a little bit more savvy and we maybe decide, even though we're at home, we're not going to let Bournemouth just make this a chaos game. We're going to actually sit a bit deeper and we're going to go a bit longer. As John said, it's probably the right way to go for Farke is to go a bit longer. Then,
it is, yeah.
It could actually be a low margin game again for us if we get that right. And maybe it's a game we might be able to nick by a single goal or something like that, 1-0, 2-1, and not make it too chaotic. But I'm not overly convinced that that's what will happen. So, I think I agree with you, to be fair. So, not going to have loads here. I worry Farke might get this wrong for like half an hour, 40 minutes, and then maybe change it. That's what my major concern is going into this game. I don't want to become a basketball match in the Jon Mackenzie derby where he's wearing his half and half scarf. Because I think Iraola probably will just about come out on top in that sense if we do that. Even though this is the first time we've come up against him since those links to him as well, isn't it? We never played them in the 2 seasons he was with Bournemouth until this third one. Anyway, anything to add, or should we finish there?
I just wanted to point out the top that I'm wearing. It's not cherries, but it's close enough. Raspberry Pi t-shirt. But yeah.
Are you claiming you're a Bournemouth fan?
No, I just felt it was fitting with the theme of the podcast.
I respect that.
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Shall we sign off then? Just a quick reminder, the website for our Patreon is patreon.com/ASAW Patreon, and we thank everyone that is a Patreon subscriber. I'm currently feeding my cat treats. If you're watching on YouTube, that's what that noise is. If you're listening on the podcast, I've just explained it to you because she decided to join the party. And subscribe because of her as well. She would be very grateful, and I can buy her more treats if you do that. So that would be lovely. I'm really trying to multitask here, sorry. Where are we? Yes. You can also donate to Leeds North and West Foodbank.org.uk, which is part of what all of our Patreon subscribers' funds go towards as well. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching. Hello again. You can hear bell crunching. I really do apologise. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very much to John, who was here, and thank you very much to Martin.
Thank you as well, Adam.
And thank you, dear listeners and watchers. We'll be back for a review of this game, but also a preview of the final game before the international break with Spurs. And have a great week and enjoy the game if you can. Goodbye.
Bye.